Hello, my beautiful, mythical old souls, and a huge warm welcome back. This week, we're going to dive into my goodness, expansive, mythical, magical topic of all things fate and destiny. And I'm joined once again by the wonderful Mike Bais. And this really is another rich, soulful conversation. Mike is a physiotherapist, counselor, university lecturer, author, and a trained priest in the esoteric Christian tradition. We explore the rich realms of fate, destiny, and the stories that shape our lives. Together, we unpack the profound distinctions between fate, the patterns of biology, psychology, and ancestry, and destiny, the call to align with a purpose beyond ourselves. Mike illuminates how fate begins in the inherited aspects of our DNA, family culture, and societal conditioning, often creating a sense of limitation that prompts us to seek deeper meaning. I share my reflections on how trauma and challenge, while seemingly random, can act as gateways to growth and understanding, inviting us to uncover the deeper purpose beyond them. We delve into the Kabbalah tree of life as a powerful map for navigating fate and destiny, emphasizing the journey from the ego-driven patterns to the heart's wisdom at tiferet, where self-awareness blooms into authenticity. And as a bonus, we also bring it my much loved myth of Chiron, the wounded healer, into focus, using his story to illuminate the transformative power of embracing wounds as a step towards grace and union. Throughout this conversation, we invite you to see your challenges as part of the greater unfolding and to explore the myths that resonate deeply with your own life. And before we jump into all of that good stuff, first of all, I'd love you to know all about my brand new upcoming crucible for women called Beauty Potion, the Eternal Quest for Beauty. Come find out more and join me, or register your interest to join me at bemythical.com/beauty. And if you're struggling with the challenges of walking your soul path in this crazy modern world and you'd benefit from guidance, support, and kinship, come join our Academy of Soul Unio. You can find out more and join us by hopping over to bemythical.com/unio now. And now back to this week's episode. Let's dive in. Hello, Mike. Welcome back to the show for the third time, I think it is.
I think it definitely is the third time. Yeah, I'm very happy to be here again and to have a new conversation with you and with a wonderful topic today. So
It really is a wonderful topic. As we were talking about before we hit record, it's definitely one that I think holds a lot of fascination, but also a fair amount of baggage for many people.
hmm.
And as you were saying, is something that I think at some point on our soul path, we'll start to ask questions about things like fate and destiny. It's like almost inevitable as a result of really consciously setting foot on the path of the
Yeah,
soul. And as you were saying, you get questions about those topics all the time from your students. Likewise, I do. And so, yes, I think I've touched on the idea of fate and destiny in the show before, but not for a while, and not through the lens that we're going to talk about it. So this feels really juicy.
very much.
So
Can't
let's
wait.
begin with, if you will, just talking about what do we mean by those words, fate and destiny. Sometimes they're used interchangeably, sometimes they're used with particular meanings that differ. And so, of course, you're going to talk about it from your lens, but what are those things from your sense?
Exactly. Yeah, no, it's very good to have a clear idea, at least from one perspective, because, like you said, there are many different ways of looking at it, especially when we look at the difference between East and West sometimes in general. But
Mm.
even within the Western esoteric world and tradition, there are differences. So, um, to start looking at it from the tree of life, the Kabbalistic ideas about it, especially the Toledano Kabbalah. you can look at the tree as a diagram where you can see yourself within it, not just physically, but also psychologically. And if we talk about fate, partially it has to do with the physical body, but of course also with the whole psychological outlook on life. And the tree behind me, the diagram, can be divided in different sections, different parts, levels. You can see three pillars behind me, for example, a left, a right pillar, and a middle pillar. But there is also a higher part in the sense of um, a lower face and an upper face, like a kite shaped kind of form below and one above. And they call that the lower and the upper face on the tree. And the lower face, the lower kite shape here within the center where my finger is called Yesod. That's the moon influence within us. That's the ordinary mind. And what we find there when we first try to define what fate is general fate or unconscious fate. This is what's been given to us at birth. It's extremely valuable and also practical. Partially, it's fate from a pure physical DNA based kind of memory, and difficult to do something about it. I mean, that's just information that's deeply ingrained within the body, and fortunately, it gives us a kind of continuation of memory through the body. That's also a part of our fate.
Would you give some examples? It might sound like a bit of a simple question, but I'd love to just bring some more color into that. Like, what kinds of things are we talking about are fated at that level?
Yeah, of course. Well, first of all, very straightforward is our physical outlook, the way that you are physically, so male or female, and all the different possibilities that you have. But maybe also, of course, the things that you have inherited through the DNA that are maybe not always positive, and those kind of traits, if you like, or possibilities, that potential is also being given to you. And and through that memory of the physical body, at the same time, um, there are also psychological things like behavior that comes with it. And when one starts to become aware of that, you can just see these little movements or gestures, and you think, oh, that was my father, or that's my mother. So these are simple things. Um, but if you go back in time, you can maybe discover it as you are working with that as well, I believe. And it's more and more coming into the world is that ancestral work. You go back, not just psychologically and spiritually, but also you try to discover the chain of the DNA going back in time and what the influences are on you. Now, you can't change the DNA, of course, but there is a possibility to consciously change the behavior that's related to the DNA. So that's also a level of the fate that we are talking about.
And also the family we're born into and the circumstances around our childhood, that would also be part of this kind of ordinary fate, the things that we've come into, been born into,
Yeah.
and certainly when we're in childhood, there's very little we can do to change that. It is, and it's like it's what we would often call it's fated, because it's kind of there and we are just living into it without really much in the way of awareness or choice.
No, no, exactly that. So the physical part is also in a sense cultural, but most of it is familiar. So you get it from your grandparents and parents, etc. But then when you are born, you are not only that's not just what you get from the physical DNA, but immediately the little psyche gets all these different pieces of information.
Mm.
And you're not really born with an ego, with an ordinary mind. So that's the second psychological part that is, if you like a hybrid form, is coming together like a synthesis within the physical body and the DNA. So with the DNA, you're already born, and then you get all these outside influences coming from parents and grandparents, culture, schooling, religion, whatever it is, and that forms an idea of me,
Mm.
called the ego in modern psychology, and often it's being pointed out here at the yesod, the foundation of the tree of life, in on a psychological level. Um, and again, it's very important that an ego is being formed within the psyche. You can't do without it. Um, and that's also a part of fate, unconscious fate. Because without knowing, we as parents and we as culture, we do not prepare the newborn for an individual life per se.
Mm.
It's being prepared for the group, for the family, for society, and therefore it doesn't know any better. Most of us don't know any better that this is a part of who we are, and we learn that we have a certain position within the group, and this is how we're being educated and prepared to go in, the great machine, if you like, and just be a part of the whole mechanism.
Mm. Yes, it's the
Um,
ego's created um, specifically for the role we certainly at that point have been kind of like raised, trained, molded into to fit into the machine, as you say. There's a couple of things I think that occur as interesting side tangents, because we like a side tangent, don't we, Mike?
we do, we do.
um the the first is there is a I guess you could say like a species level fate and a planet level fate, in that there is the fate of human beings as a whole continuing to be born, and then
Yeah,
there's and grow, and then there's also that species specific fate, which includes what you're saying there, like we grow in a certain way, which includes the formation of the ego, and that's not individual, that is true for us as a species. And I think that's an interesting, would you agree that sort of falls under the word, what we could say the word fate, that that's all part of it? There's these kind of co-conspiring levels and types of fate that all come together to create an individual's fate.
yes, exactly. And yeah, it's on the level that we are talking about now. It's the personal fate. The individual fate is something that we will talk about a bit later. But the personal fate, or the ego fate, is always in relation to the group. And that can
Mm.
be a family, a society, or a whole nation or a country, and eventually the whole collective of humanity. But for example, the group, so to speak, in the whole history of the UK, if I can call it the UK or England or Holland here, has specific things. And it has like a general outlook on life. It has particular positive traits, negative traits. You can see it in all kinds of national symbols, like the flag or the banner of a country, the colors. There's so many things that you can recognize. Oh, you are from this or that. It's
Mm.
very general, and some people don't like it because they say, I'm an individual. Um, but a lot of people, they like to identify with that fate because it gives them a kind of empowerment and identity. You belong to something.
Mm.
It gives you protection, security, and that's part of the general fate as well.
Mm.
And
Yes.
it has a
Mm.
definite purpose. It's not
Mm.
that it is,
It's not random.
not good.
Mm.
No, no, of course not. Yeah,
Mm. Yeah.
but it
It,
becomes a problem if you find yourself in a position of, imprisonment, you find yourself limited, that's often the first, if you like, impulse to search and to seek beyond it.
Yes. Well,
Mhm.
pause on that because I think that takes us very nicely into the next part of the conversation. But I want to go somewhere else quickly first.
Sure.
Um, well, I say quickly, who knows? Um, when we're talking about events that happen to us, for an example, right now, I'm going to talk about um, traumatic events, like things that perhaps may have happened in childhood that weren't things that were pleasant, whatever, there's all kinds of things that we could list,
Yeah.
um, and had a major impact on us and the course of our life. Does this is this also part of the lower face, and what can we say about that in relation specifically to fate?
No, definitely. I mean, fate is, in that sense, a general way of looking at uh, a biological, psychological pattern within us. And of course, it has, like the pillars on the tree, it has positive things to bring, and it has also other memories and influences, and that can be traumas, uh, i- personally, for the individual, and of course as well for like a whole family or a whole nation. If you look
Mm,
at, for example, Second World War and the whole history of Germany therein, they know that there is something in their fate. It even reaches beyond fate, but let's leave it with this for now. But they know because they act upon it. There's something that they need to recover,
mm,
or the UK and Holland with all the different colonies that we had for years, and they come to a certain conclusion. That is something we should apologize for. That was really not good in the history and the fate of our nation. We should change something about it.
mm.
I hope that comes close to what you're trying to address here.
Um, yes, it does. I think there's a couple of things I'd like to deepen into before we return to your last point, which is um, whether we look at this via the tree or in other ways, through examples in myth and fairy tale. I think there's something I've noticed is very helpful and empowering and sometimes even transformative in and of itself to be
Hmm.
able to see that those things that happened to us back, again, let's say in childhood, where we didn't really feel there was any choice we had to make,
Hmm.
that there was meaning in it. It wasn't,
Yeah.
random. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't misfortune in
Hmm.
a kind of deeper sense. There was it had a purpose. It was fated, and it may take us a
Yeah.
lifetime to live into understanding why it was fated. But even being able to understand it was fated, I've noticed for myself, but also for many, many
Hmm.
students over the years, there is something in that understanding that changes something.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. No, it's a very important point if you ask me, and especially when you start to become aware of this level of fate, so the collective fate or the unconscious general fate, same thing, and you start to grow out more or less on the tree that would be growing towards your tiferet here, the self, and that's also self-consciousness, and you can reflect upon what happened as looking inside of a mirror, and then you can come
Mm,
to the conclusion what you're describing and say, all right, things happen for a reason. And so what do I need to learn from it?
mm,
And then you can, whatever you like to say, you can heal yourself, you can redeem yourself, or like they say in Kabbalah, you can recover the trapped sparks of light that are within you. Um, And you can see that the story itself really serves the greater part of your life.
Mm.
And you don't have to beat yourself up with guilt and shame and those kind of things. Um, and can be also be compassionate with the process, but
Yes.
also be corrective and say, okay, but now I have to take responsibility. That's a different thing with specific faith from the self. Because I am aware of my process. Now I don't have an excuse. I can't put the blame on someone else. Yeah.
Mm. Yes. Oh gosh, there's so much here. So I can feel there is just this like natural segue now calling us up the tree.
Yeah.
And as we do so, the myth of Chiron, the wounded healer, is coming to mind as an example of this.
Yeah.
In that, just like we're saying, there can be this sense of something bad happened to me that from one I guess level of consciousness, for want of a better way of saying it, we
Mhm.
can see that as something that shouldn't have happened, and it was unfair and it was random. And
Yeah.
the what I particularly love about Chiron's story is it was all those things. Most tellings of myth suggest it was
Mm.
a complete accident. It was a random arrow that
Yeah.
hit him in the leg, and
Mm.
it wasn't, and it was a poisoned arrow, and so it created this, enormously painful,
Mm.
incurable wound, despite the fact he was this accomplished healer. And I think there is something so perfect in that it's all those things that we can look at our own story and think, this should not have happened. I was in the wrong place at
Mhm.
the wrong time. It was their fault. If only that shouldn't have happened. And I think his story is brilliant because it is such a random act of, like, seemingly random. Again,
Mhm.
that's the
Yeah.
interesting thing. Seemingly
Yeah.
random, piece of misfortune that had this irrevocable impact on his life. And
Yeah.
the kind of seed of gold in this is that when we start to even not necessarily know this, but start to inquire upon, but what if there is
Yeah.
meaning? What if
Mm.
this isn't
Yeah.
random? What if this is part of a greater unfolding? I think that
Mm.
calls us naturally into moving up the tree, moving in beyond our ego into a different kind of awareness, a different aspect of ourselves, in order to
Yes.
even begin to answer that question. It may be that we spend a whole life
Mm.
trying to answer that question, but it starts to give us a very different outlook
Yeah.
on something that seemed like it would only be experienced one way.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. What can I say? I mean, and this is where our introduction in life comes in and is so very important, because what's the outlook on life? What is our mentality towards the universe or towards divinity? So if we have learned that everything is an accident, or for example, everything's or a reward or a punishment of God,
Mm,
um, we can get into trouble when we have these kind of episodes in our life where we think, well, this shouldn't have happened, like you said, or this is a punishment from God, or
Yes, I
whatever
forgot
it is.
that part. That's I don't think that's ever been particularly part of my own narrative. This um I think potentially not coming from a
Mm.
religious background, and
Yeah,
also not coming from a parenting background where there was kind of much in the way of reward and punishment. So don't think I've quite
mm,
got that same relationship. But I'm really glad you brought that, because a lot of people do, it's not just
yeah.
thinking it's random, they actually feel as though someone or something is punishing or rewarding them with the events too. I'm really glad you brought that up.
Yes,
Mm,
and within it, you always have the dualistic philosophy in life,
mm,
wherever it comes from, that there is a good thing and there's a bad thing, and they're
mm.
always opposed to each other.
Yes.
Now, that's more or less like a materialistic um, philosophy of creation coming um, from matter actually up into existence. But the other way around, so something comes from above, so to speak, or from the deepest source of being, wherever that is. So on the tree of life, it's coming from the topmost circle or sephira, and that's the symbol of unity. And it comes down, and the influence is providence, they call it.
Mm.
And it wishes to bring everything back to unity constantly. That is a completely different philosophy.
Mm.
So everything that happens to you, good or bad, it's sometimes a tough cookie to swallow, but whatever it is for you to return to a sense of wholeness and harmony and balance within yourself. So
Mm.
coming back to the story of Chiron, for example, yes, that's then the question arises, it didn't happen against me, it happens in favor of me or
Mm.
for me. And then, of course, comes again your position as a soul, as a seeker, to do something about it, to take action.
Mm.
You can't leave it up to the source only. There's responsibility upon you. Yeah.
So I
And
would,
that's specifically.
yes, definitely. So I'd love to, before we move up the tree, I'd love to ask you whether you see there is a difference between fate and destiny, when looked at in this way, and if
Yeah.
so, would this be a good time to talk about that?
Extremely good time. And
Right
it's
on
all
time.
about time. So again, I said general fate you see here at the lower part of the tree, the lower phase it's called. And then gradually you may move up in consciousness, in your psyche, and get more acquainted with your tiferet. In that region, we find our specific fate. You wake up and you start to acknowledge that there is a process that's actually being monitored by you.
Can we give some
Like
other words for people new to the tree? Could we give some other words like we have with Yesod for Tiferet in a way that people may have a sense of like, I understand this now, even though I wasn't familiar with that word?
Yeah, so it's a psychological self. So it's the seat of your self consciousness. And like I said with Yesod, it's the lunar or moon aspect. So that's the unconscious influences on you, while Tiferet is the solar or sun influence. And the sun in mythology, for example, is always the symbol of enlightenment or self consciousness.
Mm,
So there you become the observer or the spectator of your own life. It
yes.
doesn't
Hmm.
mean that the lunar influence of your ego is gone. On the contrary, but you may observe yourself as functioning in a body and in a psyche.
Yes. And I guess some people may call this, and I know there's, nuances that we could bring to this, but people may describe that as their higher self or their inner self, their
Mhm.
soul, even. Although, again, there's kind of nuances to this. It's kind of like
Yeah,
the sort of first point of the soul or the seat of the soul that we start to become conscious of.
yeah, exactly. Because within the psychological self, so Tiferet, the heart center, and the Hatha chakra, it's really the psychological self. So if we talk about the higher self, the holy guardian angel, it's not at that level because the holy guardian angel is a spiritual level of consciousness that we find on the tree around the head, that mysterious place called Da'at. That's the inner counselor, or in Kabbalah it's called the Magid.
Hmm.
So you have different identities within the psyche, but the higher self is the spiritual counselor within you.
Mm.
But very important in the whole story.
Yes.
Definitely.
So
Yeah.
going back
Yeah.
to, I interrupted you as you were talking about Tiferet, and talking about kind of individual fate. So, and also answering this question I had about destiny.
Yeah, exactly. So individual fate lies on the level of the individual, and that is on the tree, Tiferet, or the heart center. Most of us in life have the experience during puberty where you try to break free from unconscious general fate and at least have a little, I don't know, impulse or upsurge of wanting to break free. And a lot of mythologies and even fairy tales are about this. It doesn't last long most of the time, or it is so obsessed with uh, still an ego driven part of oneself that you never really reach the individuality of the pure tiferet. But
Mm.
that's most of the time is a familiar thing for some people during puberty.
Mm.
But yeah, if the impulse persists within us somehow, because you have had a certain experience or you're going through a crisis, you try to reach out constantly towards the heart center, and you want to find the truth. That's a very important thing,
Mm.
and the truth about the self. So our yesod, our ego mind, can come up with all kinds of excuses, put on masks, and every now and then hide away from life or from whatever you don't want to know. But Tiferet really wants to shine its light upon the totality of things, because it's interested not only in the truth, but also in spiritual growth and
Mm.
development there. So, individual fate means the exploration of the deeper unconscious,
Mm.
something that the ordinary ego mind doesn't want to go towards because it's scary shit, and it doesn't like that kind of exploration. It wants to have um, kind of determinism. It wants to have a safe idea of what's coming, predictability, and those kind of things.
Mm.
But Tiferet within us tries to encourage the lower phase on the tree and says, "Come on, we need to go." And that's
Yeah,
what you
I
see
love
in a
that
lot
you
of
said that.
mythology.
It's
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I think this is a really important thing to further illuminate the way that, and certainly at points on our path, and particularly in those kind of early days, the lower face has such a heavy pull. It really kind of like keeps pulling us back. The
Yeah,
ego is wanting things to stay the same. Is want, as you say, it's kind of, it doesn't want us to rise into Tiferet, and so it can seem heavy going. We can kind of tell ourselves it's not worth it. There's more important things to focus on. However, over time, it's like there is a kind of buoyancy and momentum that takes place where more and more it kind of does make sense to us. Like we feel the pull of Tiferet upwards. And
yeah,
there is, this is slightly a segue, but I think it's important in the given, it's hard for most people to consciously fully
yeah,
live into their destiny. The
yeah.
thing that I think is so beautiful and helpful and hopeful to know is
Mm,
the deeper we go, the more our ego, yes, sod, starts to mold itself in support of that. It starts to
mm,
become actually something that is helping us to live from that deeper, more soulful place.
yeah.
And it can just take some time before that starts to reshape and remold, but I think knowing that is happening and going to happen is really helpful.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And again, the difference is that with the initiation, if you like, of the individual fate around the heart chakra, or this triad here between these two circles, Gevura Chesed, on both shoulders, together with the heart chakra. That's the triad of the soul, it's sometimes called. Um, you also want to move towards, um, yeah, your individual essence. And a lot of people like this word authenticity.
Mm,
So, where is your essence? And sometimes it's not so much to be found within the ego consciousness and within the group mind. Some people even say, I've lived someone else's life, or I've lived
mm,
the life of what my family expected from me. For some people, it's more dramatic than others. But from the individual fate, you have the urge to to start living your authenticity, and that's sometimes not always as straightforward and clear. Joseph Campbell would say, "Follow your bliss." That's the impulse coming from here. It's still
mm,
fate. It's not destiny yet. This is still individual process on a psychological level.
Mm.
And it takes often, sometimes, probably a lifetime or more for some of us to really know what's going on there
Mm. Okay,
and
you
to
tease.
integrate what.
Let's talk about destiny. I'm going to be like dangling us by a thread. Let's go there.
Yeah. Only if you have a clear sense of your individual fate and you have anchored it within your life, you're really living it, then you can ask yourself the question, because it comes to you, by inspiration or by revelation to you, the sense of, and you can put this in different words, but I'll explain it like this. You come to the conclusion that this life is not only about you. So you're here not just to accomplish your individual fate as an individual seeker, but you have something to do here. And it is probably for a greater good. And then it depends on your individual development there to what kind of magnitude you can have influence on the greater good.
Mm.
So destiny is much more about your individual position within the world and how you can make a difference there. And on the tree here, it's the greater triad between tiferet, chokmah, and bina of the spirit.
Mm.
So destiny is a transpersonal, not only a psychological enterprise any longer. It's a spiritual impulse and an action towards the world where you say, well, I am of service to a greater good.
Mm.
And we have many people, of course, in the world who have done this politically, spiritually, economically. Um,
Mm.
so, and you can go to a certain degree. You can say, okay, for example, as a spiritual teacher, I have some students here and there, or I have a little group of people. Or, you can be like a great guru or teacher, and you have influenced everything all over the world. Maybe even long after your own death.
Mm.
So,
What
and
that
that's
calls to?
important to
Sorry,
know.
no, you carry
Sorry,
on.
go ahead.
You carry on. I'll come back to that in a sec.
No, I just wanted to say that that's also very important from the level of the heart and self-consciousness. You know what you know and what you don't know, or what you can do and cannot do. So you have also a sense of realism within the ideology of your actions.
Mm.
So a healthy balance, and and that's important when it comes to destiny.
Mm. Yes, it's going back to what we were saying earlier about that sense of being punished and rewarded by someone or something else. At this
Mm.
point, there really is a sense that isn't external to us. It's happening within us. It's not kind of like we're waiting to be rewarded, saved by an outside force, and we're equally not waiting to be punished and
Yeah.
threatened by an outside force.
Mm. Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
Something that I think might be a question in the mind of listeners
Hmm.
is because many of the people listening, I know, are in some way or other going to be in roles that are in some way of service to others already.
Mm.
And so they may well be at that individual fate level, but their
Yeah.
role means that they are of service to others. How
Mm.
would you, for someone where that's the case, how would
Yeah.
you create a distinction between that and then what we're talking about here in terms of destiny, where there is this call to be of service? Because they could seem, for certain people,
Mm.
looking at my own path, that would be the case too. They could seem
Yeah.
quite similar in terms of what they look like externally, at least. Does the question make
Mm.
sense?
I think so. Yeah. And if I'm answering it in a way that you say, "Ah, you didn't understand it." Please come back to
We'll
me.
find out. Yeah.
Exactly, we'll find out. Um, yeah, no, of course, it works on the diagram. It works in two ways, and you know, for certain reasons, sometimes you see that people find themselves quite soon within on their path within a position of destiny, um, and they
Mm,
may find out after a while that um, the questions of what's my individual fate and my general fate are always included within destiny. You can't skip them.
mm,
So even if you see yourself within the greater good of all things, the rest of the whole vehicle, the whole part of your being, is included in it. You may find out, for example, is that your destiny is all about the culture that you came from.
mm,
So it's important to know, from that DNA perspective, yeah, what is it all about? Or you need to do some healing because there are also personal issues in the way, and because of that, you may not be that efficient in the great good of things in your destiny.
mm.
So there's always work on all the levels, I would say.
Yes, I think that's really helpful to recognize, actually, because I think for some of us, um, in fact, I was about to use the word destined, not realizing
Mhm.
it was directly linked to the idea of
Yeah.
destiny. For some of us, I can see it's destined that we're kind of thrust into living our destiny before we're kind of, whilst we still have much work to do lower down the tree, but it is that kind of being thrust into our destiny that calls us to do the work of the lower parts. I can, again, looking back at my own life, I would say that's what happened. It was like I was suddenly, I mean, although there was choice there, to a large extent, it kind of felt like I was thrust into a life of service. And
Mhm.
then I've been kind of discovering over the years since other parts of the tree that I hadn't really even begun work on. And so I think in some ways, particularly for those of us on a distinctly spiritual path, it can come like that because our yesod, our ego is so like working hard to keep things the same. It almost needs that kind of like breakthrough of destiny to kind of
Yeah.
juggle things up and call us into
Mm.
something else.
Yes. No, no, exactly. And the ego needs to be gradually introduced into that greater scheme of things
Mm.
within the destiny, because it may be overwhelming and too much
Mm,
for the person itself to carry.
mm,
And that's why on that level, purification as a process and a gradual introduction in a spiritual life is really important.
mm. Um, I feel called to go back to Chiron, because again, it
Yeah.
works really well, I think, as a story that is talking about these different aspects where um, Chiron already was this very accomplished, brilliant. I was about to say man, but centaur actually. Where
Yeah.
he was an
Yeah.
astrologer and a
Something.
healer and a teacher and all these things.
Yeah.
And then his destiny or his fate sort of took him into his destiny of being the wounded healer.
Yeah.
And through one telling of the story, he takes pity on Prometheus, who's been kind of chained up and having his liver pecked out daily, and offers
Yeah.
to swap places with him. And then Zeus, as part of kind of, I guess, sort of taking pity on him, decides to make him
Mhm.
immortal, which kind of frees him from his pain and also simultaneously um, gives him this immortal divine status that has allowed us to still be talking about him now, all these aeons on.
Yeah.
And so
Exactly.
I think within that story, particularly there is a kind of, there's an act of grace as part of it. There is that what we could call that kind of becoming immortal, becoming divine is really is coming into union. And so there's a
Mhm.
lot in that that kind of shows us the way. It shows us, like all the different ingredients that might make up the path of union. I'd love to know if there's anything that you feel is worth sort of further illuminating within that.
Yeah, I hope so. Well, first of all, what I find intriguing about this particular character within mythology is um, half, indeed, of its being is of the earth, so it's animalistic,
Mm,
and the other part is human, and the human part on the tree is the soul level. So he is
mm,
partially of soul level and partially of earth level. So that's where he starts already. And he's aiming as the centaur with the bow and arrow towards, well, the higher worlds, so the worlds
mm,
of destiny and providence. Um, and exactly what happens, that wounding is eventually being interpreted as it's being fated or destined to happen, because it makes him a greater being eventually.
mm,
And it's the same for us. We are, of course, the centaur in a certain sense, and to know that our particular wound may not be shot in the thigh, but it may be somewhere else. Although the thigh is a very particular mythological location in
mm,
the body for the wounding, um, but where the wounding takes place is quite significant. That's why a lot of
mm,
therapeutic approaches, sometimes psychological wounding or trauma, is also being, they ask about where in the body do you feel this,
mm,
and you can find out what the meaning behind it is.
mm. I love what you just said there about there's all the worlds within that story, and I think there's something in that that I hadn't seen how beautifully linked to the tree it was until this moment. It's funny how kind of Chiron's been the one present during this. It wasn't intentional, was it? Like we hadn't planned that at all.
No, 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 definitely not. There he is.
It looks like a bit like here's one we prepared earlier, but it isn't. Um, well, we are almost up on time. This has absolutely flown by.
Already.
Yes, I know. It's funny because we initially intended to talk about synchronicity, then realized in order to talk about synchronicity, we need to talk about fate and destiny. Then we realized like we may actually spend the whole time talking about fate and destiny and never get to synchronicity. That's exactly what's happened. So we shall come back and dedicate a whole episode to synchronicity, which is a topic I absolutely love. And this kind of form, I guess, a really good foundation now for us to have that conversation. But before
Sure.
we close on this one, is there anything you feel we need to talk about in order for this one to sort of feel complete for now on the topic of fate and destiny?
Well, something that I wanted to add to the idea of destiny, and maybe for all the listeners, something to meditate upon, is it's also the level where we start to recognize and realize that we can't do it alone. So, from the personal level, we learn that the world is we need to work hard to accomplish something. But from the level of destiny, we know that we can do something, but we are also dependent upon the grace of whatever is being given to us,
Mm,
and that can come, in certain favorable things, but sometimes it's also through pain and suffering. But whatever befalls me, I accept it as part of my destiny,
mm,
and I think that's a very mature way of looking at life from a spiritual, uh, you know, perspective. So
mm.
I think that may be a good thing to meditate upon, and for our listeners, for us, always a good thing, and maybe to as a starting point for next time. I don't know. What about
Mm.
you?
Well, no, I think that's a beautiful invitation. And I was again just smiling at the perfection of Chiron, and again the way that grace shows up in that story. And it's like I couldn't have seemingly randomly picked a better myth to illustrate this conversation. And so
Yeah.
I guess the invitation that I feel is being called for with Chiron in mind, which I've said before on several shows, is one that's so dear to my heart. I feel like I felt like a real rush of emotion there, actually. I feel like there's certain myths that really speak to us in a way that, I love myths as a whole, but there's certain ones that really call to us. And
Yeah.
they can tell us a lot about our own individual myth and then also our destiny. And so with that in mind, just the way that Chiron kind of just showed up, seemingly for me, but ultimately for all of us in this
Yeah.
conversation, my invitation would be to listeners to notice, what is that for you? What is the story, the myth, the archetype, the fairy tale that has that kind of resonance for you, that speaks to your
Mhm.
heart, really calls you.
Yeah.
Because when we find those, and I know for you, for example, the Arthurian legends are kind of been huge for you in that way, they can
Yeah.
illuminate so much that we just don't have the tools to illuminate in this kind of modern world that's stripped bare of myths and magic and fairy tales. So if there is something that you're aware of that's calling you in that way, pay attention, because just like for me, Chiron being one of those, it has shown me so much about my fate, my destiny, and the way to journey with it.
Mm. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, exactly. No, no, very important because it touches upon the essence or authenticity within the individual life. So yeah,
Mm.
perfect.
Beautiful. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So, where can listeners find out about you and your wonderful work, Mike? I know you've got some
Yeah.
really cool things coming up.
Okay.
Mhm.
So two websites. The first one is www, of course, the Circle of Avalon.nl, where you can find all about my School of the Soul, Circle of Avalon, and the other one is pure Kabbalistic. It's called KabbalahMysticalSchool.com. It's both in English, so don't worry about it. And most of my activities are there. I'm coming to the UK in March. So if you're there, it's going to be the 15th of March. I'm going to be in Devon. It's also on Facebook. You can see it on my website. I'm going to do a whole workshop day about the round table. Beautiful location, by the way. After that, in the week, I'm going to Glastonbury for a Holy Mass within the Magdalena Chapel as my other function as a priest within the esoteric tradition, which I've been doing for years. So you can also find that on the website, etc. That's going to be on Wednesday, the 19th, is it? Yeah. And then the Thursday afterwards, also in Glastonbury, it will be held in the Avalon room. It's one of the rooms of the Goddess Temple. And there we're going to do a long evening on a very particular Kabbalistic work and meditation called in Hebrew the Ohel Moed, or the tent of meeting, the tent of the Shekhinah. It's more practical than theoretical because it's a very intensive meditation, and I'm very happy to offer that to people. So that's what we're going to do there. And then the Saturday after that, or immediately, I'm in London at the College of Psychic Studies, also for a roundtable day.
Wonderful. Certainly being of service, Mike.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you so much. This has been such an enjoyable conversation. I'm really glad
My
that
pleasure.
this is where we went. So been a pleasure as always.
For me too. Lovely to do it again.
I very much hope you enjoyed watching that. And if you did and you're not already subscribed, then do hit that bell thingy and subscribe to automatically get each fresh new episode as it's released each week. If you'd like to find out more about the work we do at Be Mythical to guide and support old souls in this new world to live their own unique myth, do hop along to bemythical.com and you'll find out all the ways you can join us and go deeper with us on your own mythical journey. Lots of love for now. Mwah. See you again next week.